Nathan and his team for leading us in worship. I know I'm going to step on that. I just know it. But Nathan is the first time leading worship with us today. Did a great job. I just love his voice and his heart for God. His family have been members here for quite some time. Melita and Alan, his brother Griff. And he's recently moved to the Denver area. We're hoping, and I think his family's hoping, for a while. And will be leading worship with us while he's here. So thank you so much, Nathan, for being here. This is a big weekend. Lots going on. If you didn't hear, we started a second service today. We had breakfast church. And that started, it was at 8:45 this morning. Went till about 10 o'clock. It was really, really exciting. You would not believe it. We had not only a great group of people were here, but about 15 minutes into the service, some folks were making popcorn in the lobby, set off the fire alarm. And so the fire alarm starts going off in the middle of the service, so everyone's got to get up out of there. You know, they're sitting around tables, getting ready to have breakfast. We all have to cross the parking lot, and we got to know each other outside. The fire department came. It was all very, very exciting. You're missing a lot if you don't come to breakfast church, but everyone had a good time. This weekend is also really big because it is the Denver Rock and Roll Half Marathon, which is a big deal for us at Newday because every year we have a team that runs this half marathon, usually made up of people who haven't run before, or certainly not a half marathon, but their hearts are captivated by this vision of not only running, but raising money for clean water in Africa, for kids in Africa. Every $50 raised represents clean water for life for someone in Africa through World Vision. And so we have about 32 people running the race tomorrow, 13.1 miles. And they've raised over $60,000 to provide clean water in Africa. That's like 1,200 people are going to have clean water for the rest of their lives as a result of what they're doing. If you want to come out and celebrate with us tomorrow, you're looking for something to do, come downtown. On our Newday Network Facebook page, we posted a map of where we'll be. In Civic Center Park, if you just look for the orange tent, that's where World Vision is. Find us there, or at 17th, and I think Lincoln is where our cheer station is. You can see people as they're coming by at mile 5.5 and mile 12 as they're kind of heading and you can cheer us on. Come on out tomorrow. But today we are starting a new series, and we're calling this series The Storm-Tossed Family. I really wanted to call this series The Cross-Shaped Family because it's much more positive, and it's really the essence of where we're going to be going over these next 7 weeks. But this title came from the #1 book, according to Christianity Today, in 2018, The Storm-Tossed Family. It's an excellent book, deeply theological, on the state of the family and the theological foundations in the Bible of marriage and sexuality and parenting and divorce and all these things that we'll be covering during the series. Great thoughts in the book. I will be borrowing some of them as we go. But if you were to do an assessment of the current state, the current health of the family in our culture, simply by looking at television programs, you would conclude that we're in a world of hurt. Believe it or not, Mike took us on some throwbacks here a moment ago to 2014 or 2004. I want to take us even farther back. Believe it or not, it was just 60 years ago when June and Ward Cleaver had the show Leave It to Beaver. And they depicted a family and a way of doing family that seems completely foreign to most of us. June Cleaver would wake up early in the morning to put on her makeup before making breakfast. And then she would lay out her husband Ward's clothing on the bed so he would know what to wear each day. She would clean the house in a dress and a string of pearls, full makeup. She would make sure that the dinner was on the table right when Ward came home at the same time every night. Everything was hot. Everything was ready to go. Their two boys, Wally and the Beeve, would get into innocent shenanigans that would make the audience laugh, but they always respected their parents and would do what they were told. Well, fast forward 10 years. It was 50 years ago this year that the Brady Bunch first aired, showing a very different view of the family, the first blended family television program, the first couple that shared a bed in the same bedroom were Greg and Carol Brady. And things continued to, depending on your perspective, progress, digress, I don't know. But then we had, Married with Children and the Bundy family. And we come to shows like we have today, depicting the family like Modern Family. Currently in its last season, it first debuted about 10 years ago. But it is intended to kind of, again, depict what today's family in our culture looks like. And while I have never seen an episode, I did a little research on the show for this series and just realized that it is very, very, very different from Ward and June Cleaver. right? So the family, again, if we're just judging this on television, has changed a great deal in the last 60 years, and it certainly has changed. I mean, the family has been redefined by our Supreme Court, and so now families look very different. I mean, they have before the Supreme Court decision, but we have traditional families, we have blended families, we have single-parent families, we have heterosexual families, we have homosexual families, and all these things are becoming normative in our culture, where 60 years ago, they would have been on the margins at best, but more appropriately, they would have been unheard of, many of these things. And you may say, hey, we're making progress, depending on your point of view, or we're digressing. But here's the thing I want us to realize, is that 60 years ago, the family was not the ideal picture that Ward and June showed on television, and we have come to where we are in the last 60 years, and the family is just now for the first time under attack. The reality is that from the time sin first entered our world, Satan has made the family his focus of attack. You know, the family is one of God's first creations that we read about in the very first chapters of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2, we read about how God created the first man named Adam. And Adam existed for some short amount of time by himself so that he was able to become aware of his aloneness. And he realized that his aloneness wasn't good. And so God caused him to come into a deep sleep. And during that deep sleep, God took one of Adam's ribs, and out of that he created a woman. And Adam woke up and he saw her and was smitten by her. And they had this union that was so beautifully depicted in the Bible. The Bible says that they were both naked and they had no shame. How powerful that is. They were naked before each other, but they had no shame. And this was not only intended to be what marriage was supposed to be, but also what the family was supposed to be. Total transparency, vulnerability, naked and no shame, mutual love, mutual purpose. But something went terribly wrong when that first couple, that first family, decided to follow and pledge their allegiance to a deceiving serpent rather than the God who loved them and created them. And in that moment that they decided to disobey and rebel against God and trust this snake-like God, it's what the theologians call the fall. And everything in our world was broken. Everything was affected by the fall, perhaps most of which the family was affected by the fall. And we see the results to the family immediately. In Genesis chapter 3, immediately after this decision that they made, they went from being naked and having no shame to seeking to cover themselves up and hide, and they're pointing fingers and they're blaming each other for what just happened. The family is falling apart. Their sons end up having jealousy amongst each other, and one ends up murdering the other. The family is quickly declining. And the Bible is so honest about the rapid decline of the family. It tells us exactly how dysfunctional things were. We see things like murder in the context of the family, polygamy, or one person marrying and having many spouses, father and son division, rape and incest, vigilante tribal honor killings in the context of the family, sexual blackmail, husbands prostituting their wives for political influence, brothers selling brother into slavery. I mean, talk about dysfunction. This is all in the first book of the Bible. This is how quickly the family begins to decline. This is not a new thing. From the very beginning, Satan made his plan of attack to disrupt the family. His modus operandi, the thing he wants to do, is to hurt God and destroy people. And he knows that if he can destroy the family, he's got a great chance of doing that because the family is so foundational to our formation as people. He realized if he could disrupt the family, he could disrupt us. If he could affect the family, he could affect us. You see, the family is our source of identity and inheritance. Your family is where you got your identity from as well as your inheritance. Now let's just kind of unpack these two things for a moment. Two things that we rarely think about. But first of all, your identity comes from your biological family or the family that raised you, whether it was biological or adoptive. And we don't tend to think that because in our individualistic culture, this culture in which we say, I am a self-made man, I am a self-made woman, the other people don't tell me who I am. The reality is your family has more impact on how you view yourself, those people that raised you during those formative years, than we could ever fully imagine. Your identity. Think about it. Just think about the most basic form of your identity, your name. We didn't think of our own names typically. Maybe you did. But most of us were given our names at birth. My first name was given to me by my family, as was my family name. My family name, my last name, lets me know that I'm not just some individual that came out of nowhere, but that I was born into a community. I was born into a tribe of people like me. I am a Kennedy, right? The Kennedys are my people. This is a part of my identity. Your family name is a part of your identity. But more than that, I'm a junior, right? I'm a second, right? Now, I actually said my full name in the breakfast church, and I got laughed at. I'm going to say it again. So everyone, can we just keep straight faces? My name is David Larry Kennedy Jr., okay? I don't tell a lot of people that, but because I got laughed at, no. But the fact that I'm a junior forms a part of my identity. It not only means that I have a father who has the same name as me, but it means that when I was born, my father was proud to have a son. And he wanted that son to carry his name. And he wanted his son to carry a part of his identity. Right? Our identity is formed by our family. But think even, our names are superficial. Think about how you view yourself. Whether you determine yourself to be worthy of love or not. That's a part of your identity, and that comes from your family of origin more than anything else. And it comes from the multitude of little experiences that you have with your family, or the big ones that are formative. Maybe it's just a look that you get from your parents every time you do something well, and it reinforces that behavior. And you say, oh, when I do this, I get approval and I get love. When I do this, I don't get that look, or I get an ugly look. I don't want to do those things. So maybe a part of our identity is that we're performance-based. We learned growing up that when we perform well, when we get good grades, when we clean our room, when we make our bed, when we behave our kids, our parents, that our parents lavish us with love and applause and approval. But then when we don't do those things, when we don't get the good grades or make our bed or clean a room or obey our parents, then that love and approval are withdrawn. And we begin to realize, oh wait, my identity, my worth comes from how well I perform. Or maybe your identity early on became that of the peacemaker. Maybe you were in a tumultuous house with people fighting all the time, and you realized that if you stepped in the middle of that and you just did your thing and you pushed people apart, that you could make peace, and now that's a part of your identity. Anytime you find conflict, you're the one who just steps in. Hey, can we just smooth this over? Can we just not talk about this right now? Let's just make peace. Or maybe it was in your house, it wasn't through peacemaking, but it was through humor, and you realize that if you could just get people laughing, that they would stop fighting, or the pain wouldn't be quite as easily felt. And still to this day, you're the funny one, and you're always the one with the joke because that's a part of your identity. Our identity comes to us through our family of origin, the family that we grew up in. But more than just our identity, we also gain our inheritance through our family of origin. Now, again, this isn't something that we typically think about a lot in our Western world. When we think about inheritance, we typically think about a transfer of assets that occurs when somebody dies. And so, your grandparents or your uncle dies or your parents die, and they leave you maybe a piece of land or their golf clubs or their collection of shot glasses that they collected over their lifetime. That's what we think of inheritance, and that's certainly a part of inheritance, but the Bible has a much deeper understanding of inheritance. And it's something that we don't live into once someone dies, but we live into it our entire lives. So your parents and your grandparents and their parents before them will determine where you live and what you do for a living. So for instance, in the book of Genesis, Isaac, Abraham's son, he knew he would be a nomadic shepherd, because his father was a nomadic shepherd and his father's father, and Isaac would pass that on to his kids. That's what he was going to do. Peter, one of the disciples of Jesus, he knew all his life he would be a fisherman, because his father and his father's father and his father's father's father had been a fisherman, and from the time he was young, he was taught how to fish and how to run the boat and how to clean the nets and how to sell the fish and how to run the family business. Peter knew that when his father died, he would run the business, but not only then, but during his entire life, he would be a fisherman. That was his inheritance. Now, while we may not determine what we're going to do for a living based on what our parents do, some of us may, but most of us don't, or where we're going to live based on where our parents have lived, passing down land from generation to generation, we still live with a very real inheritance from our parents. We do what we do We do how we do it because of our inheritance. How we view the world comes as a result of our inheritance from our parents. And it may be because, well, we're rebelling against what our parents have done. We don't want to do religion or politics the way they did. We're not going to see the world the way they did, and I'm going to do it my way. Or it could be the embracing of how our parents did things. But either way, they're still shaping our identity and our inheritance. Think about all of the ways our family affects how we think about things. For instance, they teach us how to view money and finances. What is the purpose of money? Is it to be saved? Is it to be piled away? Is it to be spent? Are we to be generous with it? Do we talk about it? Don't we talk about it? Do we talk about how much we make? Don't we talk about that? How we view money and finances comes to us from our family of origin. How we view sex. Again, is it a tool to be used? Is it an expression of intimacy? Is it something we talk about? Is it something we don't talk about? Is it taboo? Comes to us from our family. Conflict. Do we talk things through? Do we yell and shout? Do we go behind closed doors? Do we avoid altogether? How you view conflict comes to you through your family of origin. And then you get married. And then you got somebody else who knows all different things from their inheritance, from their parents. And you got to kind of make that work. And we wonder why marriage is hard, right? How about emotions and anger? How are they expressed? Are they expressed? What do you do when you're angry? Do you show love? Religion, politics, are these dinner table conversations or things that aren't talked about? Are we churchgoers? Aren't we churchgoers? What's our view of God? What's our view of politics? Are we right? Are we left? Are we progressive? Are we conservative? Marriage and relationships. Are these things sacred? Are these things to be invested in? Are they for life? Are they disposable? Love, is it conditional or unconditional? Success, what is the definition of success? All of this, we just learn in these kind of subtle ways as we grow up, as we hear our parents talk and as we interact with our siblings. This is all a part of our inheritance. But here's what we need to see, that our identity and our inheritance goes much farther back than just our biological parents or the parents who raised us. It goes past our grandparents, past our great-grandparents, all the way back. As a matter of fact, if we look at it biblically, our identity and inheritance ultimately comes from our very first parents, Adam and Eve. That first family. They formed our identity and our inheritance more than our parents did. What they did? When they rebelled against God and they chose to set their allegiance with Lucifer in his deception, they passed on an identity to us of sin and rebellion. They passed on an inheritance to us of generational curses, of shame, of pain, of violence, sexual deviancy. I mean, everything that you could think of that brings pain to life was passed on through Adam and Eve to their children and their children and their children. And you can see the patterns. As you read the book of Genesis, if you look at the one generation to the next, passes the same sin on, the same curse goes down through the line. Abraham lies about his wife being his wife, and this is my sister, and this deception. What does Isaac do? He does the same thing. The violence gets passed on. The deception gets passed on. The rebellion gets passed on, generation to generation. It is an inheritance of pain and suffering and ultimately of death. But it's more than just an inheritance of pain. It's also an inheritance of promise. Because God comes to Abraham and he says, you know what? Adam and Eve messed everything up. They broke everything. But through your family, through your descendants, I am going to break the curse. One will be born who will put an end to the inheritance of pain, who will bring a new identity and a new inheritance. And so for generation after Abraham, not only did they have to live into this inheritance of pain, but they also had this hope of an inheritance of promise, that this child would come, that this man would come, and he would change things. And then Jesus was born. And the Bible makes it very clear that Jesus had a unique identity and inheritance, that he was first and foremost a son of God. The eternal creator God, the one who spoke a word and created everything, that was Jesus. And he was also God's son, so that when he was baptized, the Father would say, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Jesus understood this was his identity. He was God's son, but yet he becomes a human and is born into a human family. And the Bible makes it very clear that Jesus was a son of Adam, or a son of sin and rebellion. That he was a son of Abraham, a son of deception. That he is in that family line with all that dysfunction. And he's born into a family. He has a mom and a dad, and there's all kinds of issues there. And he's got siblings, and he's living into that. He listens to his parents fight and quibble, and he has the jealousy of his siblings to deal with. I mean, he entered into all of our dysfunction and all of our pain and our systems of brokenness. But yet, because of who he was and his identity was with his Father in heaven, he was able to rise above it, live a perfect life. But then he fulfilled his plan, his mission, his destiny when he took all of that curse, all that dysfunction, all that brokenness to a hill called Golgotha, where he willingly laid himself down on a wooden cross. He allowed nails to be driven through his hands and his feet, and he was raised up to bleed out and die, all while taking with him all of our brokenness, all of our shame, all of our dysfunction, all of our violence and rebellion, even our death. He took it with him to the cross. You know, I don't fully grasp what happened at the cross and how it changed everything. How the cross was the most powerful event up to that point that would forever change history. That through the cross, when I identify with Jesus on the cross, when I allow him to take my place, that I all of a sudden receive a new identity. That I receive a new inheritance. That I am welcomed into a new family line. The Apostle Paul was one who understood the power of the cross perhaps better than anything, and this is what he would talk about consistently. For instance, in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, and this is a verse we'll come back to throughout this series, but listen to what Paul says. He says, "I have been crucified with Christ." In other words, what he is saying is, in faith, I have crawled up onto the cross with Jesus, and I am in him, and he is in me. And as he dies, I die. As he pays the penalty, my penalty has been paid. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. In other words, the old Paul is gone. Paul, who is the son of this mom and this dad and brothers of these people, that Paul is now gone. And the old patterns and the old systems are gone, which is why he says, I no longer live, but Christ now lives in me. I have a new life. I have a new identity. I have a new inheritance. I have a new family. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So what Paul is saying is that when we identify with Jesus on the cross, when we place our faith in him hanging there and saying, what he has done is done for me, it's done sufficiently to pay for my sin, to break the curse of my family that has been lingering over me, having power over my life, that I die. And I'm entered into a new family with a new identity, a new inheritance. And that's what he says in Romans chapter 8. He kind of spells this out very clear, and we'll kind of end with this. Romans 8, Paul is writing about the beauty of the cross and the gospel. And he comes to this section in verse 14, and he says this. He says, "For those of us who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God." In other words, when we die with Jesus on the cross, when we place our faith in him, when we believe that his sacrifice is enough, we die, but the Spirit of God, God himself, comes and lives inside of us. He takes up residence in me. And when he does that, I become a child of God. God is my Father. The Spirit you receive does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. In other words, the old patterns are gone. The power of the addiction that I inherited from my parents. The power of the signature sin that came down to me through my father, my grandfather's father, and all of those, alcoholism or adultery or swearing or lying or whatever it may be, that power has been broken. I don't need to return to that anymore because of the power of the cross. I don't need to live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, to daughtership. You are now children of God, and so by him we cry, Abba, Father. Abba. It's the most tender expression that a child can utter to a parent. It's like daddy, papa. This is our new relationship with our Heavenly Father. And now this defines who I am. This now forms my identity. I am no longer as much a Kennedy as I am a son of God. This is my identity. I still got to deal with being a Kennedy. But my new identity is being a son of God. And I could talk to him this way, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Paul wants to make this so clear. The Spirit wants to make this so clear. You are children of God if you have faith in his Son. And because you have this new identity, we also have this new inheritance. And that's where Paul goes next. He talks about this inheritance. He says, now, if we are children, our identity, then we are heirs, our inheritance, heirs of God, and co-heirs with Christ. Are you kidding me? Not only am I an heir of God, and I get like this little portion of like his kingdom or inheritance, but I'm a co-heir with Christ. That means everything Jesus gets, I get, right? Equal share. Me and Jesus. Jesus is my big brother now. And I get equal share with Jesus. Now, good news, bad news, because what did Jesus experience? What did Jesus inherit? Suffering and glory. Pain and promise. Right? Indeed, we share in his, Jesus' sufferings in order that we may also share in his glory. Jesus, while he knew he was the Son of God, he knew this was identity, he knew what his inheritance ultimately was glory, he experienced suffering in this life because he was living as a child of God in enemy-occupied territory. He was behind enemy lines. He had the enemy attacking him. Things would happen to his life that would mean suffering. And the same is true for us. Just because I'm a child of God, son of God, daughter of God, doesn't mean there won't be suffering in my life. Jesus went through it, and he said, hey, if you're my followers, you're going to go through it too. There will be pain in this life. Just because I have this new identity, new inheritance, doesn't mean that everything is kind of smooth. But we also know what our inheritance is ultimately, right? It is glory. Jesus went through the suffering, short time, now has an eternity of glory. He is at the right hand of God, and that's what we inherit as well. This is our inheritance. Glory. Eternity in our Father's house. So what does this mean? What this means is that all of us come from broken families, biological families that have formed us, deformed us in many ways, sometimes from intentional harm done by parents, most often by unintentional harm done because they were just passing what their parents did to them or how they were formed. And it's given us this identity and this inheritance that is, again, it's under a curse and it is deformed and it is heading for death. But because of the cross of Christ, we have the opportunity to step into a new identity, a new inheritance, and a new family. The cross of Jesus can heal the wounds from our family of origin and give us a new identity, a new inheritance, right? If you have faith in Jesus, you have a new identity. You're a child of God, right? You're no longer the Kennedy or whatever you are. You're now a child of God. More than that, we get a new inheritance. It means the curse has been broken. The power that our family of origin had over us has been broken. We can step out of it into a new life. Now, that doesn't mean that hard work doesn't need to be done. It doesn't just happen automatically. I say I have faith in Jesus and all that power is gone. No, I've got to lean into the resources that he's given me. I need to lean into God's word and get it into me. I need to pray regularly. I need times of solitude and quiet. I need Christian community. I may need Christian counseling. The tools are available to me, but the power has been broken. The curse has been lifted. I could step out of it and into a new inheritance. But more than that, we get a new family, new identity, new inheritance, new family. That means that every other person who's placed their faith in Jesus is now my brother and my sister. And we get to come together and we form this new kind of family that is intended to, we get to kind of experiment with the way things were supposed to be before sin and the way things will be in heaven. We're supposed to like love each other sacrificially and selflessly and forgive each other when we make mistakes and show grace to one another and almost be like naked and no shame. That we just have this vulnerability with one another in this family and learn how to do family right. But finally, what this means is that I view my biological family in a new way after I come through the cross with Christ. And I view my biological family through the lens of the cross. Because what the Bible describes as the new way of doing family are words like love, right? We're going to love. But we're like, oh, we've always loved, but we've loved the way the world has loved. The cross shows us how to love. Or submission. Well, what does that word mean? I don't like that word in my culture. Well, the cross shows us what submission is. Forgiveness. Can I really forgive this person? If Jesus on the cross can pray, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, how will I view my family through the lens of that kind of forgiveness? Purity. What does purity look like through the lens of the cross? The cross shows us what that is. And so for the rest of the series, we want to say, what would it look like to view all these different aspects of my family of origin and my biological family currently through this lens of Jesus hanging on the cross and telling me, pick up your cross and follow me. But right now, I'd love to know where you are with this. And so as Lisa said, we're going to come back to this Connect card. If you have that, if you could pull that out, please. I would love for you to just kind of let me know where you are on this topic. And there's lots of ways you can do that. One would be if you are like, something is on your heart, like God's brought something to your mind during the service, or you brought something into the service today, and you like prayer for it, could you just write that on the back under We Value Prayer? And let us know how we could pray for you. And I assure you, we will pray for you. We would love to pray for whatever it is on your heart. And if you'd like us to contact you about that, we would be happy to do that. Just check that box there as well. That's one way you could respond to us, is with a prayer request. Or if today you're hearing this news about the cross and this new identity and this new inheritance, and you'd like to receive that, and you've never received that before, let us know that you'd like to do that. Under next steps, the very first box you could check is, I said yes to Jesus for the first time today, or I recommitted my life to Jesus today. We would love to celebrate that decision with you. That's the most significant decision a person can make. Would you just let us know that you've made it so that we could celebrate that with you? There's other things you could check there, but finally, if you'd be willing, if you want to, over these next 7 weeks, say, I would like to view my family, my biological family, through the lens of the cross. I don't even know what that means yet, but I want to do that. Would you just draw like a picture of a cross there in the comment box, just to say, I'm on board with this, and I want to know how I can do this, and it's my intention to do it. In a moment, Nathan and the team are going to come back up. They're going to lead us in a song. Our ushers will come forward. They'll collect the offering. You can just kind of put these right in the offering bag along with an offering if you brought it. But right now, let me pray with you. Father in heaven, God, thank you for the cross. It has such power. We don't fully comprehend it, but we want to experience it. We want the new identity. We want the new inheritance. We want the new family. We want to view our families through the lens of it. And so, Father, bring your Spirit to set us free from the curse of the past, from the patterns of the past, and give us the ability to step into this new identity and inheritance and live in freedom through your power. And by your name, we pray. Amen.